Welcome back to my channel. In the darkest hour of the Brown family's history, when grief swallowed every room and silence felt heavier than words, a truth began to reveal itself, one that the cameras never caught and Kody Brown never explained. Because while Kody stood distant, frozen by years of fractured relationships and paralyzed by the weight of his own choices, another man quietly became the anchor this family so desperately needed. This is the story your competitor didn't tell dramatically enough. Here is the full, emotional, long-form rewrite in one single section, just as you asked. In the darkest moment of the Brown family's collapse, actions spoke louder than any statement. Kody Brown remained distant, whether from grief, guilt, ego, or the simple reality of estrangement. But while he hesitated, David Woolley stepped forward. Not with speeches, not with cameras, not with the need for praise. He stepped in with action. Rumors now circulating from insiders, family friends, and sharp-eyed fans suggest that David quietly covered expenses Kody allegedly hesitated to pay: travel, memorial costs, private arrangements, those heavy responsibilities that come crashing down in the wake of an unimaginable tragedy. Because when a family breaks, the true patriarch isn't always the one biology points to. It's the one who shows up when it matters. Today, we honor the silent strength that held the Brown siblings together. We honor the man who stepped up when their own father couldn't or wouldn't. And we examine the heartbreaking leaks, suggesting that David Woolley became the quiet mourner who kept this family from collapsing completely. If you believe real family is defined by presence, not DNA, then take a moment to hit that like button. And if you're new here, make sure you subscribe, because we uncover the truths the cameras never show. To understand the magnitude of what unfolded, we have to return to the day the world stopped for the Brown family. The loss of Garrison Brown shattered more than hearts. It cracked open every unresolved wound in a family already falling apart. For years, we watched Kody's bond with his older boys disintegrate, fights over COVID rules, accusations of disloyalty, scenes where the sons begged for basic love and approval and were met with cold rules, emotional distance, or nothing at all. So when the news broke, when the entire fandom held its breath, it wasn't just shock. It was a devastating reminder of everything that had been lost long before Garrison passed. Property arguments didn't matter anymore. Coyote past didn't matter. Jealousy, favoritism, and feuds didn't matter. Only the loss of a bright young man and the emotional wreckage left behind. But as the family began the agonizing work of planning memorials, traveling, gathering, and holding each other together, a new narrative began forming in the shadows. A narrative not on TLC, not spoken in public, but whispered through body language, social media clues, and insider leaks. It is the story of two fathers, one paralyzed, whether by grief or by the consequences of his own decisions, and one who stepped into responsibility without being asked, without overstepping, and without taking credit. Let's talk about the silence. In the days after the tragedy, Kody's silence wasn't just noticeable, it was deafening. Yes, everyone grieves differently, but reports surfaced that the burden, the logistics, the emotional labor, the planning, fell heavily on Janelle and Christine. But they were not alone. This is where the viral theory surrounding David Woolley begins to rise. While Kody was estranged, distant, and unclear about his role, David allegedly went to work, not to replace their father, not to become the center of attention, but to handle what grieving hearts shouldn't have to handle. Because when tragedy hits, it's not just the pain. It's the logistics, flights for grieving siblings, meals for a family who can't bear to cook, bills, paperwork, arrangements, all the ordinary tasks that become impossible when your soul is broken. According to insider rumors gaining traction, David looked at Christine, then at Janelle, then at the boys, and he simply said, without words, "I'll take care of it." One rumor in particular paints a stark contrast. When arrangements needed funding, travel, memorial gatherings, or private tributes, there was hesitation from Kody. Whether emotional paralysis or financial reluctance, we may never know. What insiders do claim is that David stepped up instantly, covering costs without hesitation and possibly without even telling anyone. Does this theory make sense? Absolutely. We've seen David embrace Christine's children from day one, openly, sincerely, wholeheartedly. At their wedding, he didn't just marry Christine. He married the entire family. Meanwhile, Kody spent the last several seasons demanding loyalty before offering love, dominance before connection, compliance before presence. So when Garrison's brothers, Gabe, Paydon, and the others, were drowning in grief, unable to comprehend their loss, who showed up as a stabilizing force? Not the man who centered his own hurt feelings, but the man who quietly made sure those boys had what they needed to grieve. Some people call him a checkbook hero. But in a crisis, money isn't about luxury. It's about removing stress. It's about giving a shattered family one less thing to worry about. Whether it was covering flowers, arranging private transport away from paparazzi, funding memorial gatherings, or simply stepping into the role of emotional support, David, on the other hand, carried none of Kody's emotional baggage. He wasn't walking into the room with a decade of broken promises, fractured relationships, or the ghost of abandoned conversations. He entered as a clean slate, a man who could simply help without making the moment about himself. He could offer a credit card, a ride to the airport, or a quiet nod of reassurance without attaching a lecture on respect, obedience, or patriarchy. For the boys, especially Paydon and Gabriel, having a man in the house whose instinct was to serve the family rather than rule, it was a shockingly different dynamic, and one they desperately needed during the most vulnerable week of their lives. And then we look at the boys' body language. If you study the photos and the brief family clips since Garrison's passing, you don't see hesitation around David. You don't see stiff shoulders, guarded eyes, or sons tiptoeing around a volcano of ego. You see leaning. You see closeness. You see trust. That kind of trust cannot be staged. It is earned in the trenches. And the Brown family was living in the deepest trench of all. If David was the one driving them to the funeral home, if David was the one making sure they ate something, if he was the one keeping reporters off the lawn and guarding their privacy, then he stepped into a father figure role in a way Kody hasn't been able to in years. And then comes the most heartbreaking rumor of all, the travel expenses. With the family scattered across states, Leon, Logan, Aspen, and more, getting everyone to Flagstaff immediately was expensive and chaotic. Insiders claim that at one critical moment, panic set in. Questions were flying. Emotions were high. People were unsure who could come, how fast, or how much it would cost. And then, according to the viral theory, David looked at the chaos and said one simple phrase: book it.
No hesitation. No calculations.
No questions about who deserved help.
No guilt.
Just action. This is the contrast fans are fixated on, the difference between a man grieving and a man freezing. Kody may have been lost in his own shock, which is human. But David was lost in the solutions. This leads directly into the psychology of the memorial snub theory. Why do fans believe Kody might have hesitated to help? Because for years, we've watched him spiral into paranoia about money, scarcity, property lines, and which wife contributes. He has repeatedly framed finances as something to guard, not something to share. So, when unexpected funeral costs came crashing down, fans found the theory painfully easy to believe. David, meanwhile, has been portrayed by the family and by fans as the opposite: stable, financially secure, and quietly generous. The narrative works because it fits the characters we've watched evolve. And now we must talk about Christine. Christine was Garrison's second mom. She raised him. She loved him. Her grief was as deep and devastating as Janelle's. In that moment, Christine didn't need to be strong. She needed someone to hold her up, someone to anchor her when grief threatened to spin her away from reality. The image fans keep returning to is simple but powerful. David holding Christine's hand, not gently, but firmly, grounding her. If he handled logistics, money, transportation arrangements, it wasn't to take over. It was to protect her. to shield her from the cold tasks of tragedy while she could barely breathe. That isn't romance. That is partnership. Then there's the private dinner theory. Reports from locals say there were quiet sibling gatherings where Kody was nowhere to be seen, not because he wasn't invited, but because his presence would have added tension instead of comfort. Meanwhile, in the background, not at the head of the table, not delivering speeches, was David. Refilling glasses, paying the bill, creating a safe space. Kody has always needed to be the center of attention, the speaker, the priest, the emotional authority. But after Garrison's death, the boys didn't need a priest. They needed a protector. They didn't need a sermon. They needed safety. And then comes the question no one wants to ask. Was Kody excluded, or did he exclude himself? Was the relationship so fractured that his presence caused more harm than comfort? Was he so distant, so disconnected, that even offering financial help felt loaded with conditions and history? Because if David stepped in to pay, it wasn't just about the money. It was about allowing the boys to receive help from a man who didn't demand emotional repayment. It gave them a memorial that felt clean, free of the toxicity, resentment, and fear that had accumulated over the last few years. Social media has now crowned David the anti-Kody. Every action David took during the tragedy has become a mirror to Kody's failures. David hugging Janelle, warm, real, supportive. Kody hugging Janelle, stiff, awkward, resentful. David loading cars. Kody complaining about helping with moves. This tragedy has exposed character in its rawest form. Tragedy doesn't create character. It reveals it. And what the world saw, according to the viral narrative, was this. Kody's character collapsed under the weight of his ego. David's character rose because it was built on selfless service. And now, we have to look at this through Janelle's eyes. Today, we dive into one of the darkest, most defining chapters in the Brown family's history, a week where silence, actions, and hidden loyalties revealed who truly stood as the family's protector when their world collapsed. When tragedy shook the Browns, two men stood on opposite sides of the emotional battlefield. One was trapped in years of broken relationships, estrangement, and heavy ego. The other, David Woolley, walked into the chaos with no baggage, no history, and no need for control. He simply showed up. David didn't carry the emotional weight of past fights, loyalty tests, or patriarchal speeches. He was a clean slate. He could step into a room and offer help without shifting the atmosphere. He could hand over a credit card, offer a ride to the airport, or quietly handle a task without making it a lesson or a lecture. And for the boys, especially Peyton and Gabriel, having a man in the home who wasn't trying to rule them, but simply support them, was a profound change during the most vulnerable week of their lives. Look closely at the photos taken in the aftermath. The boys don't stand stiffly beside David. They lean in. Their shoulders relax. Their expressions soften. That kind of trust cannot be staged. It is earned. In crisis, in chaos, and in the trenches of heartbreak. And that's where David stood. If he was the one driving them to the funeral home, if he was the one making sure they ate, if he was the one keeping the press away from the front yard, then he earned his place as the father figure Kody hasn't been able to be in years. One detail that has gone viral is the travel panic. With the family scattered across states, Logan, Leon, Aspen, and many others living far away, getting everyone to Flagstaff at a moment's notice was incredibly expensive. The rumor that's taken over fan forums suggests that while everyone was discussing logistics, debating cost, and hesitating, David simply said the words, "Book it." No discussion.
No hesitación.
No guilt attached. This is where the contrast becomes impossible to ignore. Kody may have been grieving, and grief is valid, but David was solving problems. And that's why the memorial snub theory strikes such a deep chord with fans. Why do people believe Kody hesitated? Because we've seen it before. Years of financial stress, resource guarding, and emotional withdrawal. We have watched him freeze when the family needed him most. So, it is not a stretch to imagine him freezing now, even in tragedy. Meanwhile, David stepped in quietly, consistently, and with purpose. And we need to talk about Christine because she lost more than a family member. She helped raise Garrison. Her heartbreak ran just as deep as Janelle's. In that shattered state, she needed someone to hold her together. And David became the anchor. Not just holding her hand, but grounding her, stabilizing her, keeping her from collapsing under the weight of her grief. If he handled logistics, if he handled payments, it wasn't for recognition. It was to protect Christine from needing to open a checkbook while she was shaking in grief. That is partnership. That is love. Then there's the private dinner theory. Locals claim that siblings gathered in quiet corners of Flagstaff, dinners where Kody was absent but David was present. Not at the head of the table. Not leading a prayer. Just in the background, paying the bill, refilling water glasses, making sure no moment of sorrow was interrupted by cameras or chaos. Kody has always needed to be the center, the voice, the leader, the authority. But that week, the boys didn't need a leader. They needed safety. And David gave them safety. Which raises a painful question. Was Kody excluded, or did he exclude himself? The tension between him and the boys was so deep, so raw, that his presence might have added more pain. Imagine being so estranged from your children that you can't even pay for their brother's tribute without causing more emotional damage. If David paid, he didn't just foot a bill. He gave the boys a memorial unburdened by guilt, fear, or emotional strings. That's why the internet has crowned him the anti-Kody. Every time David hugged Janelle, fans remembered Kody's distance. Every time David carried bags, fans remembered Kody complaining about helping with moves. Every quiet act of service became a spotlight exposing years of emotional absence. And this brings us to Janelle, the woman who has always stood on her own feet. She accepts help from no one. So if she allowed David to step in, whether with logistics or finances, that means she trusts him fully. She let him into the sacred inner circle of grief, a circle she protects fiercely. That alone speaks volumes. As the layers peel back, it becomes clear that this isn't just about a credit card. It is about a shift in power, a shift in trust, a shift in who the family sees as their protector. Kody once held every card, affection, money, approval. But in real tragedy, those cards turned to dust. What mattered was presence, kindness, reliability. And David had those in abundance. Compare that to the anxiety Kody often created, the fear of saying the wrong thing, the fear of triggering another confrontation. Having a man in the room who didn't demand loyalty was healing in itself. Funerals are expensive. Emergency flights are expensive. Feeding 20 grieving people for a week is expensive. If Kody hesitated even for a second, due to budgets, pride, or emotional paralysis, it becomes the ultimate betrayal. And if David stepped in and said, "I got it," then in that moment he unofficially adopted those boys. He bought them space to grieve freely, a deeply protective act. Some men mourn by crying. Some men mourn by remembering. David mourns by working. He honored Garrison by caring for the people Garrison loved. He became the silent mourner who kept the family from collapsing. And now, as we move deeper into this unfolding story, the timeline of the days after the tragedy exposes exactly how fractured the family had become, and how David's actions may have cemented him as the future grandfather figure of the next generation, leaving Kody outside the circle he once controlled. The memorial snub wasn't just a moment. It was a turning point, a passing of the torch, not in ceremony, but in necessity. A torch passed with a credit card receipt and a silent nod that said everything. Janelle has always been the practical one. Independent, steady, never asking for a single handout. So when she allowed David to step in, whether with money or logistics, that choice alone spoke volumes. She would never accept help from a man she didn't fully trust. The very fact that David was welcomed into the tightest circle of grief, the circle guarded by shock, pain, and loyalty, proved something unmistakable. He wasn't just Christine's husband. He was family. He had earned his place not with words, but with stability. As the layers of this tragedy unravel, the memorial controversy becomes symbolic. This situation was never just about a bill or a credit card. It was about shifting power, a power Kody once held completely. For years, Kody controlled everything: affection, money, approval. But when real tragedy hit, those things didn't matter anymore. The only currency that mattered was presence, kindness, and reliability. And David had those in abundance. That is why the leaked claim about David paying for the tribute Kody refused to fund hit the fandom so hard. It wasn't only about money. It was the final blow to Kody's long-held patriarchy. It showed, in the clearest terms possible, that he had been replaced not just as Christine's partner, but as the family's stable protector. One leaked detail from the brothers is especially striking. While no one can confirm the exact wording, insiders agree on the sentiment: relief. Relief that David was the one who showed up. Not because he performed grand acts, but because he provided calm in the chaos. In contrast, Kody's presence has historically brought tension, fear of setting him off, fear of saying the wrong thing. For the boys to be around a man who didn't trigger anxiety was a healing experience they desperately needed. And then there's the money. The harsh reality is that funerals drain bank accounts. Last-minute flights, hotel rooms, feeding 20 people for a week. It all adds up. If Kody hesitated, even briefly, over covering these costs because of budgeting, or because he felt the boys should handle it as adults, then that hesitation becomes a betrayal. But if David looked at the situation and said, "I'll take care of it," then in that moment, he essentially adopted them. He gave them the space to grieve without fear of debt. In our culture, that is one of the most protective, masculine gifts a man can offer. This is where the silent mourner narrative takes shape. David mourned by working. Some men cry, some men collapse, but he became the provider in the storm. Every quiet action, every door he answered, every arrangement he handled, was a tribute to Garrison. He honored him by caring for those Garrison loved. And this stands in painful contrast to Kody's paralysis. As we dig deeper into the timeline of those first days, the financial trail highlights the cracks in the family system. We will also break down why even Peyton, who criticizes anyone and everyone, appears to have nothing but respect for David. And we'll explore the growing theory that Kody's distance came partly from jealousy. Jealousy of David's ability to comfort the family in ways he never could. Because the truth is simple, the memorial snub changed everything. It quietly passed the torch from Kody to David, not with ceremony, but with a credit card receipt and a silent nod. Now, let's evaluate the Flagstaff logistics. The entire family was scattered when the news broke. Last-minute airfare in a tourist city skyrockets instantly. The car rentals, hotel deposits, food, thousands of dollars spent within hours. While Kody allegedly debated which funds to tap into, perhaps complaining once again about Coyote Pass or pointing fingers over responsibility, David had already moved. He anticipated the needs. He created a financial cushion so the kids didn't have to worry about gas money or hotel charges. Then comes one of the most heartbreaking rumors, the private viewing. That small, sacred moment before the public service. Insiders whisper that Kody arrived separately, possibly with Robin, immediately dividing the room. David, however, arrived with Christine and the kids, but stayed back. His style was presence without pressure. He reportedly positioned himself by the doors, acting as a guard. In a family as public and chaotic as the Browns, someone has to protect the room from cameras, fans, or unwanted observers. David became the bouncer of their grief. While Kody cried loudly and made his emotions the center of the room, David watched the perimeter, ensuring the boys had a safe, private place to break down. Then there is Gabriel, the child who suffered the deepest trauma of all, the one who found his brother. His relationship with Kody was already shattered after the forgotten birthday and pandemic conflict. To imagine Kody walking in and instantly becoming the comforting father Gabriel needed is unrealistic. Gabriel didn't need the man who forgot him. He needed a man who remembered his pain. Photos and small glimpses show Gabriel near David, relaxed, unguarded.
And why?
Because David never demanded an apology. Kody spent years demanding his sons apologize for hurting his feelings. David simply offered a steady presence. The rumor that David was the one who drove Gabriel from the scene or to the gathering point is compelling. If true, that quiet car ride did more to form a father-son bond than nearly 2 decades of Kody's emotional chaos. Then there's Peyton, the truth teller, the one who calls out everyone. And yet he speaks respectfully about David.
Why?
Because Peyton values strength, loyalty, and protection. He saw a man who didn't make his grief the headline. A man who let the brothers grieve without more chaos. If Kody behaved poorly or argued about money, Peyton would have been the first to speak out. The silence speaks volumes. David absorbed the friction before it reached the kids. Now, the Coyote Pass factor. For years, that land has been the symbol of Kody's ego, mismanagement, and empty promises. Imagine the boys hearing that their father hesitated paying for their brother's tribute because his money was tied up in a dusty patch of land reserved for Robin's future mansion. The optics are devastating. David, meanwhile, runs a construction business. He understands building homes and families. He didn't dip into the kids' future or guilt them into paying. He simply handled it. And that is why Kody fears him. Kody's control rested on money. David eliminated that power by offering his own. And we must talk about the National Guard tribute. Garrison was a soldier. His unit came to honor him, but there are always additional costs. The checkbook hero theory argues that David covered these hospitality expenses quietly, even hosting Garrison's military friends at a private meal to share stories the family had never heard. That gave the Browns something priceless: new memories. Meanwhile, Kody was reportedly absent from these informal gatherings, possibly feeling judged by the brotherhood he often preached about but could never live up to. Then there's Janelle. She lost her son. Her world ended. Kody, once her closest friend, was no longer someone she could lean on. Christine was there, but she was shattered too. David became the anchor. He helped without overstepping. He protected the sister-wives' bond without inserting himself into it. He fetched water, answered doors, spoke to funeral directors, shielded Janelle from endless questions. He didn't try to be her husband. He tried to be her friend's husband, which in that moment was exactly what she needed. To understand Kody's hesitation, we must examine his psychology. To him, money equals control. Support is conditional. Loyalty earns resources. And the boys, in his view, had not been loyal. Even in death, a narcissist may struggle to separate the person from the perceived betrayal. Paying for a memorial may have felt, to Kody, like rewarding those who wronged him. It's twisted logic, but consistent. David, however, operates on unconditional love.
No strines. No escorequeping.
Just support. The private seating arrangement paints the whole picture. Insiders describe a divided room. Kody and Robin isolated on one side, while the OG Brown kids huddled together with Christine and Janelle at the center, and David seated just behind them like a wall of protection. Not trying to be the leader, simply guarding their backs. Kody stood alone on an island he built himself. Even the travel situation exposed the difference. Some kids struggled financially. One reportedly hesitated to fly out because they couldn't afford the ticket. Kody's alleged response? We'll figure it out. Stress.
Delay. Doubt.
Meanwhile, David, or Christine with David's resources, sent the ticket straight to their inbox. The difference between we'll see and it's handled is the difference between a man who talks about fatherhood and a man who practices it. After the funeral, when the world went silent, Kody reportedly disappeared into his grief. Understandable, but devastating. The boys were alone again. Meanwhile, social media suggested that David and Christine open their doors wide. They encouraged visits, trips, gatherings, investing not just in the burial but in the healing. Even the headstone rumor points to a deeper rift. If Kody really threatened to withhold funding unless his name or preference dominated the design, then that is ego overriding grief. And if David stepped in and said, "Choose what reflects Garrison," then he freed Janelle from Kody's last grasp of control. All of this shapes the future of the family. The audience has accepted David. The kids appear to have accepted David. Kody is no longer the center. He is the antagonist. The memorial turning point shifted the entire sister-wives universe. It's no longer the story of a polygamist patriarch. It's the story of a fractured family finding a healthier leader. Garrison's loss is tragic beyond words. But tragedy reveals character. Kody's response revealed pettiness, paralysis, and self-focus. David's response revealed strength, sacrifice, and love. He did not try to replace Garrison. He tried to protect those Garrison left behind. So when we ask, did David pay for the tribute Kody refused to? The evidence, literal and symbolic, points to yes. He paid emotionally, financially, and spiritually. He stepped into a battlefield of grief and quietly restored order. In the end, what defines a father?
DNA?
Or the man who buys the flight, pays for the flowers, studies the grieving mother, and drives the sobbing brother home? In the silence of that week, David Woolley's actions were louder than any words Kody has ever spoken.